You can see the different dynasties. Shang, we mentioned a little bit. The Zhao or the Chao dynasty is what we're going to talk about. Then the Qin dynasty and the Han dynasty. So these are the three that we're going to focus on. All right, so China's dynasties. Chinese history is generally divided into periods based upon dynasties, which is a ruling family that governed China at the time. So from 1027 BC to 220 AD, China was ruled by the three main dynasties. That's the ones we're going to focus on. So in 1027 BC, the Shang were conquered, which I showed you on that chart, marking the beginning of the Zhao or the Chao dynasty. And one of the big things to come out of this is the mandate of heaven. The Chinese believed that the ruler was chosen by heaven, and that heaven would also overthrow a bad ruler. So scholars taught that if a ruler became selfish and thought of himself first before the people, then heaven would bring floods, riots, and revolts and end his reign. Then a new ruling family would take over. So the Chao rulers established a system in which land was given to nobles in exchange for military service. So feudalism, all right, which we've talked about, which we're going to talk about, and we've talked about a little bit before. So the Chao rulers conquered neighboring peoples, made them part of China, and nobles became too powerful for the Chao rulers to control, and China was eventually plunged into a civil war. So Zhao dynasty philosophers or Chao dynasty philosophers, Confucius and Laozi, that's how you pronounce that, these philosophers were deeply affected by this turmoil. So you have this civil war that's going on in China, and these two philosophers grow up during this time. So they lived through the end of the Chao dynasty. And what happened is, so there was so much chaos that Confucius sought to bring order to China's social and political life, while Laozi was more interested in peace and inner stability for individuals. So here is a look at how their language actually kind of evolves. So what you have is a horse. It gets a little bit simplified as you go through, and then eventually this is the character for a horse. And this is the territory that we're talking about. So the coast and then the two main rivers. So the Honghe, which is where the Chinese river valley civilization started, and then the Yangtze. And here's the Chao, spelled with a C. So here it is again. Here's part of the Great Wall. And the next one is the Qin dynasty. It's pronounced Qin, and that's where we get the word China from. So the Qin dynasty, Shi Huangdi was the lord of the Qin, so he's the emperor, and he united all China through conquest. He was the first Chinese ruler to call himself emperor. Said that all power should rest in the hands of a single absolute ruler, believed that the people were not necessarily good, and that they needed a strong government to punish those who committed bad acts. So he's one of those people who believes there's a lot of bad people around, so you have to have a very powerful government to control those people. So his rule was very harsh. He rejected Confucianism, and he actually burnt Confucian books. And he persecuted the scholars that were around. So he went after people who were, intellectuals. So Xi's accomplishments: he centralized power by dividing China into districts, each with its own military and civil administrator. He built roads and canals. We talked about this with the other groups. The way you connect your empire is through roads and canals. And then he began to unite the distant parts of China. He came up with a uniform set of writing and measurements, which we've also heard of from other empires. And this was established throughout the empire to make it one unit. So he joined together several existing protective walls to form the Great Wall of China. So there was several individual walls, and he tried to pretty much put them all together. He built an immense army of clay soldiers to surround the tomb. So they believed in afterlife pretty much like the Egyptians. And so he had this clay soldiers, horses, chariots, everything built. And they actually were in the tomb with him. So the Great Wall is 1,500 miles long. It's 22 feet high. It is 15 feet thick, taking thousands of laborers many years to complete. She also had workers build an immense army of clay soldiers to surround him and his tomb. And although Xi's rule was short, had long-lasting effects in creating a unified, centralized China. And here's a picture. And these are actually people over here. So you can see they are all life size. So they're actually the same size. And each one of them is individually different. And some people think that it's the artist, each artist that did it, that's kind of their facial features. And here is the Great Wall. Try and really protect these cities right here, especially Beijing. So imagine your class is conducting a trial of Shi Huangti. Was he justified in his actions? The class should present arguments. So this was one you'd have to really look up on the internet. All right, the next one is the Han Dynasty. And the Han Dynasty, following the Qin Emperor's death, the people rebelled against his harsh rule. And after several years of civil war, here we go again, a new dynasty emerged. And the Han emperors kept China unified for over 400 years, so a very long period of time. So their accomplishments, they invented paper. I don't think I have any examples here. They invented lead ceramics, okay, which we kind of call porcelain. They had advances in silk weaving, which you see over here. They had the examinations to select candidates for imperial service. So if you wanted to serve in the government, you had to pass an examination that was on Confucius. So candidates were tested on their knowledge of history and Confucian philosophy. This encouraged the spread of Confucian ideas, which kind of unifies the country back again. So the examination system was to strengthen the power of the emperor by weakening independent nobles. The nobles were willing to kept gaining power and kept plunging China into these civil wars. So they could no longer claim the high status and rewards of the imperial service as a matter of right. So really what they're doing is, if you're smart enough to pass the examination, then you can work in the government. Just because you're a noble doesn't mean that you get to work in the government. You have to pass this exam. Only those who passed these rigorous tests could assist the emperor in his government, and examinations provided a way for the commoners to move up the social ladder. So Confucian ideas came to unite all government officials and Chinese upper class as a whole. And this is the time of the Silk Road. So the Silk Road connected the Roman Empire over here by the Mediterranean with pretty much all the other regions of Asia. So merchants would carry goods by camel and by caravans along this route. They would go through mountains, they would go through steppes, they would go through desert with resting points, and those resting points eventually would become towns and cities. So China exported its silk, iron, bronze in exchange for gold, linen cloth, glass, ivory, animal hides, horses, and cattle. India also introduced Buddhism, which became popular in China. So you have Buddhism come up out of India, spread throughout the Silk Road. And here's some stopping points along the Silk Road. So children and women under Han China. So wealthy families in Han China had many children so that their sons could serve in the government and their daughters could marry into wealthy families. Marriages were arranged, so the parents told the kids who they were going to marry, and families prepared their daughters to serve their future husbands. So under Confucian teaching, women were subordinate to men. They were seen as inferior. And in childhood, a woman would obey her father. In adulthood, they would obey their husband, and then in old age, she would have to obey her son. And there was public schools for boys only. So the fall of the Han Dynasty ruled for over 400 years, nearly twice as long as the history of the United States. Han emperors were weakened by a series of rebellions against their authority, and to crush these rebellions, the imperial government gave more power to provincial governors, including the ability to tax and raise their own local armies. So some governors used these newfound powers to become local warlords, and economic hardship from population growth led to a rise in banditry, which means people were attacked, mainly probably on the Silk Road and things like that. So in 221 AD, the last Han emperor turned his power over to these independent warlords, and Han China finally collapsed in a series of civil wars and split apart into a series of separate states.